Okay, so what is NetConf? I'm not going to give you a full update of it because, well, we've done that once already here, and no point in repeating. But the basic view of it is it's what we hope you would use to configure your network. I'd like to just turn things around during this discussion periodically and let you guys be the voice of NANOG and the voice of the operator and ask a couple of questions as we move forward. But we think that this is going to be a really important component to help normalize a lot of scripts, to help make them a lot less fragile as we move forward. So over the last 6 months, NetConf has gotten a haircut. A lot of the protocol that was in there has been redone. We're going to have new drafts out within the month, but we're getting rid of a lot of the overhead that was in the original protocol. Initially, we looked at my ideas came out of the beep work that was being done, and looking at providing multiple channels of communication for both events and configuration and tying those together. We're going to tear that out actually, at least out of the base NetConf draft. And the way things are organized, it's very much stack-like. You have NetConf, you have something that transports it, and then below that you have TCP/IP. So we pulled out, as I said, we pulled out notifications. We've reduced the number of capabilities dramatically, and we've also attempted to make sure that there was no such thing as a NetConf and NetConf Lite. NetConf will be NetConf Lite. This is very much trying to boil things down to the simple ways that things used to be done in TCP/IP, and sometimes still are. Also boiling this down, it meant one connection, one use. So, if you're going to do events or you're going to do notifications, keep on using syslog until there's something better. If you want to use RC3195, you do that on a separate port, on a separate communication line. So my first question, as we move forward, we have a couple of questions that the working group would like to ask you guys. And the first question is this. Do you guys find that you have devices that sit behind NATs or behind a firewall or behind a DHCP assigned address that you want to configure? So end customers that use PPPoE or other things where you want to configure the device where using the IP address would be a very bad key, or where you don't have the ability to send a SYN where the other guy is going to receive it. Anybody? A couple of people. This is the Paul Francis friendly question because we're thinking about NATs in IETF. So this is also the classic case of managed offerings. If you're actually going to offer a service that does sit behind a NAT or is itself a dynamically assigned address where the other guy doesn't really know how to configure it, doesn't want to configure it, and actually wants to have high-level services, here's a chance to speak up. Okay. So let me suggest that this is an interesting question of itself, but we have another one that's come up on the list that I'm going to ask instead, which is, as a matter of security, we're looking at two different mechanisms to communicate in. One is SSH and the other is beep. In the case of SSH, there's a debate that's raging on the list as to whether or not to use the same port that SSH access is used for now. That poses a little problem for me, or at least it did conceptually, because that would mean that if you wanted to implement this thing, you need to go and modify each and every access list that you use to control access to your devices. So my first question to you is, does anybody care? Do you care? Do you have access lists that control access to, say, port 22 on your device? And now I've given you the downside. Now let me give you the upside. The reason we want to separate the port is because it's possible that SSH might be used for different purposes, like configuration and administration being one, and just user access being another. The next question is, do you care? Do you foresee this use as something that where you would have multiple uses? And if so, maybe you might not want access to the configuration and administration port where you do want access to SSH. So show of hands, who would like everything on one port because the administration is expensive? All right. Who would like everything on multiple ports to separate out based on functionality? Okay. the general view that I'm sensing the working group is that we're going to go with the latter with an option for you to change it. Okay. One final question that I'll ask is, the reason that this becomes important is because as you try to configure all this stuff, it means hopping from one router to another or one switch to another and actually making a configuration change. So just a sense of the room, how many people have more than 25 devices in their network? Okay, if you have more than 25 devices in your network, keep your hands up for a sec. How many of you use automated tools to update your configuration files? Leave your hands up. All right. Those people who still have their hands up, you really do care about this stuff because this will simplify your automated tools. So my next comments will clarify how you can participate. So here's some of the things we're thinking about. The world is going SOAP and HTTP, and one of the things that we really wanted to do was ponder whether you could use existing tool sets that Microsoft or other companies might provide. Of course, in this crowd, you might say, ooh, Microsoft. But in fact, using existing tool sets is a nice thing in as much as you don't have to write it yourself. Similarly, if there are Perl libraries or stuff like that. So we're trying to decide what the right mandatory substrate should be. Should it be SOAP over HTTP? Should it be SOAP over HTTPS? Should it be SSH? Or should it be BEEP? And we want your input. What is the authorization model that should be used? This is an ongoing discussion. Right now, we don't have a standard model, and that work is going to begin soon, I believe. So there's a lot of room for input there. What sort of existing toolkits can be used? Locking. Here's an issue that we've run into, which is while you might have ways to lock a configuration file today depending on your OS, if you automate the process and you limit lock and you have an authorization model that allows only limited access to a device, then a global lock can mean that a person who has that global lock can lock things and resources that he doesn't have access to and effect a denial of service attack. How do we deal with this? This is a question that is raging on the mailing list. And support for different operating models. This is a big issue. There's a modeling community out there which would like to see us all go to SIM or stuff like that. I'm not sure it's 100% possible, but that discussion is just beginning. So here's more information. A website, and a mailing address, and me in a bar. And with that, beer and gear.